Hello, my name is Klaus-Jürgen Wischnewski and I'm a German photographer. I do Straßenfotografie. All good Straßenphotographers were German. As you know, Heinrich Cartier-Bresson oder Gerhard Winogrand oder Dorothea Lange oder Vivian Maier, of course. Robert Frank, Van Ho. Ho is short for Holsteiner. I don't know if you know that. If you want to do Straßenfotografie, or as some people call it, street photography, you have to have the camera. There's only one brand of camera that's acceptable. This one here. Oh, sorry, I still had the flash on there. I had a portrait session earlier. This is the camera brand, you know, with the red dot. That's the only camera you can use, and you have to have a 35mm lens. This one is f0.3, so you can take pictures in the dark. And if you want to drive to your street photography locations, you have to drive in a 1961 Volkswagen Beetle convertible, and that needs to be black. Otherwise, forget it. It makes perfect sense that for certain types of photography you would need certain combinations of camera bodies and lenses and other equipment. It's not a coincidence that when you see photography taking place at a sports event, for instance, that people have DSLRs and gigantic zoom lenses. Those are the two components that you need if you want to make sure that you get absolutely the fastest possible shots, the fastest shutter speed, the optimum control over what you're shooting, and the fastest possibility to zoom in and out depending on what your composition is. There's no zooming with your feet when you're standing at the side of a football field. So it also makes sense that there is typical equipment for a thing like street photography, but I think people tend to idealize this kind of stuff a little bit, and it turns into a sort of excuse for not concentrating on what is really important, which is to observe and to catch the famous decisive moment, which is something that you could theoretically do with pretty much any camera. Now, obviously, when you see that guy in the street with his Canon, what's it, the 5 Mark III or whatever, D5, I don't even know, Canon model names. And then when you see that guy with a flash on top of the camera, I mean, you know that you don't find yourself in the presence of the next amazing street photographer, because he clearly has some kind of disconnect in his mind about, you know, what tools you use for which job. But that said, I think it's a little simplistic to look at what 1 or 2 or 3 legendary people used and say, now this is the must use, must own, must have equipment. It makes sense to have rangefinder cameras in street photography, but not really anymore in the days of digital photography. I mean, I think this is, to me, a clear leftover from the film days, where it was important to be able to look through an optical viewfinder and not deal with any of the shortcomings of looking through the lens. So cameras that are very popular for street photography now are the Fujifilm X Pro 2. I still have an X Pro 1. See, I'm supposed to hold it on this side. This is the X Pro 1 that I never sold because it's so freaking beautiful and classic and wonderful. And it has an optical viewfinder, but if I'm honest, I have to admit that I'm using it can switch back and forth between electronic viewfinder and optical viewfinder, and I use the electronic one a lot, even though it's not as advanced as the ones in cameras that came after this one. This camera is what I use when the light conditions are good, when I don't have to worry too much about autofocus, and when I just feel like holding something solid and substantial in my hand that makes me feel like the real deal. More often than not these days, though, I'm using this, which is smaller, lighter. It's the XT20. And when I really want to grab something quickly and just run out the door and not even worry about questions like, is the lens on, is the lens clean, I'm using my Ricoh GR2. Now this is a legendary street photography camera for a reason. It's a full, not full frame, but a full APS-C sensor, so it's surprisingly big, sharp images coming from this tiny little camera. And the fact that it's so tiny is good for several reasons. Not just that it's easy to pocket, you can literally stuff this in the pocket of your jeans, but also that it looks so unobtrusive. It looks so harmless. I mean, most people wouldn't take this for a professional camera, a camera capable of delivering professional results, which it is. Now, when it's raining or the weather is misty, or I want to really go someplace where I don't want to be seen as a real photographer at all, I take something even smaller and even more inobtrusive. This is a Fujifilm, what are these called? Fine Pix, I think. They bring out a new model of this every once in a while. This is the FinePix XP120. I think the 130 is out now. These are amazing. These have 16 megapixels. They have an optical zoom, which I don't use. I just leave it at the wide position at all times. They are waterproof, which is really great. I don't trust, weather resistant. Like if I pay $1,000 for a lens and it says weather resistance, that's still for me not a reason to take it out in the rain. I won't do that. I think it works up to a point. I'm not saying they lie about that, but I wouldn't trust it. No, I take this little toy looking thing that people think, make me look like a tourist. So I can totally get away. Well, this guy's he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just shooting like random people because he's just, he's just visiting from out of town, and he's just, holding his weird little tourist camera wherever he wants. And I've gotten some really interesting results with this camera. Now, it has a little bit of barrel distortion, but, that's such an easy fix in Lightroom or Photoshop that I don't even worry about that. Now, as for lenses, this whole discussion is going to be a little Fuji heavy, so I'm just talking about that brand because that's the brand I use, but a lot of this goes probably for all manufacturers. The Ricoh has an 18.3 millimeter lens that translates roughly to a 28, which would be a pretty typical street photography wide-angle lens. The next wider angle that I am using, no, there's one even wider than that. That's my Samyang 12 millimeter. That is a lens that is also available under the product name Rokinon. I think they're identical. They're probably made in the same place. They're sold under two different product names. It's a 12 millimeter f2. It's very popular with people who use the XT20 for some reason. And it's very wide. I mean, 12 translates to 18. So that's a wide angle lens. The next wider one is the beautiful Fujinon 16 millimeter f1.4, which is pretty big. I mean, not enormous, but pretty big, and one of those lenses that I wouldn't carry around on any old day and to any old place, because it's worth a lot financially and emotionally to me. And also, quite frankly, I don't like to go super close. Like with this lens, if you want to capture a person, you have to go pretty close. And most people, this is another one of those street photography cliches that I don't quite understand. They say that, you have to go in people, you have to be in people's faces. And I don't quite subscribe to that. I think you can get some interesting shots without the person even noticing you were there. The lens that I have on the X-T20 most of the time is the beautiful, tiny little 27mm Fujinon pancake lens. This is an f2.8. If I take it off the camera, you can see this is really so flat that the X-T20 basically becomes not much bigger than an, what are those called, the X100, like the classic fixed lens Fuji cameras that are very popular with street photographers. Then the next bigger lens after that I would use is the 35. This is the 35 f2, one of my 3 desert island lenses, and that would be a rough equivalent of a 50mm. So this is not super wide, not super close. This is like a standard lens, and I think the frame with this lens is in 90% of the cases what I want. I usually am more interested in people, but I do want to get a little bit of the surrounding, but I don't want to document a whole scene in most cases with, dozens of people in them. And then, this may be a little surprising, and this is something where purists will contradict me. I sometimes go out with a big lens. This one just looks so enormous right now because it has a big sun hood on it right now. So, but even without the sun hood, this is pretty massive. Wait, have I not changed this? No, I am on manual focus. I just thought I saw hunting.
It's not your fault. I know.
This is a 90mm f2. Some people don't like this lens. I don't understand some people. I think this lens is absolutely gorgeous, and it is so easy to get sharp images with a blurry background. I guess that's not something that people usually want in street photography. Another stereotype about street photography is that you want, if possible, everything to be tack sharp. You don't want to romanticize the view of the world. You don't want to make it look, you don't want to sweeten it. You want it to be a reportage. So it needs to be tough and grainy and sharp. But I like going out with the f90. And now on the X-T20, the f90 looks enormous. But I absolutely love that combination, and I use it frequently with the touchscreen set to shoot, so I can touch the screen and I can get my exposure by touching the screen with my finger not even on the exposure button. So that is a thing that's interesting, because a lot of people don't realize you're taking a picture when you do that. They think you're just scrolling through your shots that you've already made. I think that's pretty helpful. I sang the praises of the touchscreen shooting option on the XT20 in an earlier video. I gotta walk that back a little bit because I've noticed that it's not super fast. You lose shots when you work that way. If your subject is moving, your quota of hits becomes smaller. So nothing replaces the exposure button in terms of getting your shot quickly. But even with that, I still like to shoot with the screen up, the flippy screen up like this. And then even when I use the exposure button, I can still shoot from the hip. And with the 90mm, I've gotten some images that I thought were interesting. So in closing, don't believe anybody who tells you there's only one tool for the job. Obviously, if you want to drive a nail into the wall, a hammer probably will work better than a screwdriver. And but you can do it with a screwdriver, and maybe some people would prefer, well, maybe, probably not, but you know, I'm going to abandon this example. What I'm saying is, it makes sense that for photography that is done with a documentarian impulse, like street photography frequently is, you know, it makes sense to stay in the wide to normal spectrum in terms of focal lengths. And if you go into the telephoto business, you enter paparazzo territory, which, you know, you could argue is a kind of street photography, but you know, I'm not sure that's who you want to be. Anyway, I think it's important to think about all the aspects of your technical toolbox and develop a very good idea of why you're using certain things and why they work for you, why they just give you the results that you like and why others don't. And you only get that experience by trying out different things and, you know, taking a close look at the results. And don't be sidetracked by arguments of how it's done or how so-and-so did it. You know, I mean, yes, Ernest Hemingway was an amazing author. Will you turn into Ernest Hemingway if you buy the type of typewriter he used? Probably not. You know, it's important to look beyond the equipment, and you know, that's what I'm doing right now in trying to figure out this channel. I've realized that it's kind of pointless for me to talk about equipment all the time. So this video today was an attempt to sidetrack that at least a little bit. On the other hand, my most successful video so far has been one where I talk about a specific camera, and so, you know, it's a search, it's a quest. Camera Quest is a distributor of fine lenses. Wow, that got off track fast. Anyway, have a nice day and go out and try different things and try unusual things. Maybe take a lens that you wouldn't even think of using and be surprised by the results. And if you stop being surprised, you've either found your style or you've become incredibly boring, or sometimes both. Good luck.